He was the instigator of the war, and they said about him that he conquered 4 kingdoms, which means he became a cold-blooded tyrant. Royal blood flowed in his veins, but he was still considered an illegitimate child born of a monster. It was rumored that he had to appear with his face covered even at his own wedding. The mistress and the maid were riding in the carriage, and she told the lady that perhaps the man would never be able to show his face, and she was not sure that he could even properly accompany her. She believed that marriage was a very tedious task. The girl agreed with her. After all, her father even sent a nanny to look after her, even though the girl has already grown up and been married twice. The maid coughed, and then she advised the girl in any case to do as her father told her. The noble animal's hooves clopped rhythmically along the road. One of the accompanying knights shared a rumor that they are going to a large estate on infertile land. He said it was better to hope that no monsters would appear. And then a deafening explosion was heard. The carriage shook considerably. The girl looked out the window cautiously. The knights accompanying her dismounted and surrounded the carriage with the lady to repel the attack. The maid was scared. She told the lady that if they died, it would only be together. She argued that if the gentleman found out that even a hair had fallen from her head, then they would all be in trouble. At that time, a wolf-like monster of enormous size was peeping through the carriage window. The girl noticed the fear in the maid's eyes and turned to the window. She pressed herself against the servant's shoulder in fear, thinking that it was all over for them all. There was a clink of metal. The toothy monster was pierced through the chest from behind by a sword blade. The girl looked out the window, and a broad-shouldered man in light armor looked into it. Blood spilled out in patches from the wounded monster. The maid felt sick from the emotions she had experienced. The girl looked at the savior with wide eyes, unable to say anything to him. She voiced the assumption that he was the same duke, and if not, then she asked for forgiveness. The girl dared to get out of the carriage. She explained that she had not yet seen the duke, so she might not have recognized him. The man visibly shuddered, although he was strong in spirit. Lady Lily could not understand the reason for the man's silence. It was strange to see him hesitate. After all, he himself was able to defeat such a monster alone. The girl could also assume that he could be some kind of commander or lead a battalion. The man turned his head, looking around. Another one in a burgundy raincoat came up and said that there were problems. It was discovered that a fairly large monster was hiding here. The man claimed that unfortunately for him they still had business here, and he didn't know what to do with this lady. Then he stared with the piercing gaze of his gray eyes at Lady Lily. He decided to connect the others and escort Miss to her destination. The girl asked the sir to forgive her. She clarified that he was going to fight the monster alone. He silently looked into the distance, lost in thought. Lily understood that it might take an entire order of knights to defeat the huge beast. Therefore, she asked me not to go to certain death alone because of her. In the carriage, the maid finally came to her senses. She ran out to meet the mistress. She asked if she was injured. It was impossible to allow even a scratch on her body. The man was holding a horse by the bridle. They called him Talon. Mr. Duke asked to see that his wife reached the castle, and he himself was going to stay here and take care of the monster. He accepted the order. He also asked to deal with this maid. It was visible from a distance how the maid ordered the mistress to obey. She roughly shook off the girl's dress, complaining that she didn't even realize how much it cost. The man was handsome. Brunette with wide-set steel-colored eyes. A powerful jaw and a fairly thin nose complemented his aristocratic profile. The girl didn't know who he was, and should she be wary of him? The man on horseback left without saying goodbye to the ladies. It was already the dead of night. The moon and stars brightly illuminated the huge and magnificent ducal palace. He shone in the starlight, as if he himself were from 1,000 stars. The maid carefully blindfolded her mistress. The girl asked if it was true that she couldn't see his face. The servants replied that this was the duke's order. The stern-looking maid warned the mistress that she should under no circumstances try to see his face until their wedding night is over. She bowed and left the room, clicking the lock. Lady Lily thought she would be treated much worse. She never would have thought that she would spend her wedding night like this. She turned to the sound of the door closing and asked what would happen if she did see his face. She was wearing a dark robe and her eyes were tightly blindfolded with a black ribbon. But there was complete silence around the girl. Her question was lost under the high arch of the room, remaining unanswered. But then the loud footsteps of heavy shoes were heard. Lily asked who was there. The man's bass voice answered her mockingly that his wife turns out to be a very curious coward. She flinched when she heard him. She stuttered and called her husband his lordship. Her feet were bare and her legs were naked. A male figure approached the girl. Lily's body was shaking. It was like the wind rushed past her, and a large hand with tenacious and strong fingers was already hugging her waist. She began to touch his torso. She asked who he was. The man turned her to face him and pressed her to his chest. He asked Lily if she was waiting for him. The girl was lying on the bed in a supine position. The man was on top of her, leaning on the bed with one hand and holding her hands with the other. She asked him to untie her eyes. The man said that unfortunately he could not allow that to happen. He grabbed her foot and pressed her against his body, spreading her knees apart. The girl said that she had been waiting for him all this time. He let go of her hands and pressed one of her hands to his face, asking if it was true that she was waiting for him. Lily replied that it was so. After all, she really wanted to see him. Lily touched his face with the tips of her thin and graceful fingers. Then she carefully stroked the eyelids. She noted to herself that the man had surprisingly soft skin, as if for someone to whom the battlefield had become a second home. The girl touched his nose and lips. She thought that her husband must be good-looking, and she didn't understand why he needed to hide his own face. The Duke said that apparently he should now reward her for her languid and patient wait. The girl tried to pull her hand out of his grip. The man was holding the girl's head from behind. He kneaded her shoulders from behind. She said that she did not need his caresses, and she turned away. The man said that he was already ready. He unbuttoned his shirt with one hand, and with the other he held the girl by the shin, pressing her to his thigh. And he expressed the hope that she was also prepared. The morning sun shone dazzlingly brightly through the window. The fire crackled cheerfully in the fireplace, and Lady Lily was still basking under the covers in her bed, moaning languidly from the sensations after her wedding night. When she fully woke up, she began to remember the details of that night. He kissed her passionately on the lips. At some point, she forgot that she was blindfolded. For the first time, the girl felt calm without feeling pain. The fingers of his hand penetrated her fingers, joining together. To the girl's surprise, she felt good then. She sat under the blanket and was a little sad. That night, the Duke didn't even insert into her. And now remembering my past husbands, their rude treatment in their intimate moments, she understood that her new husband, she couldn't even imagine what he could do to her. She drove these thoughts away from herself. After all, a lady shouldn't think about such obscene things. She looked around, and only now did she realize that he was not here. Lady Lily swung her feet off the bed to put on soft slippers. She knew that even though there were rumors, the Duke was like a monster. But for her, everything was different. She was about to look outside the doors and look for where her maid was. She thought that nothing would happen if she left the room like that. But when she collided with another maid in the corridor, right out of the door, she got scared. The maid, also in fright, dropped the tray with a crash, along with what she was carrying, right onto the floor. Lady Lily was surprised and frightened. The maid had a prosthetic instead of a leg. The girl stuttered and apologized to her mistress. She said she was sorry, that she could have hurt her because of her carelessness. The lady looked with wide eyes at what was happening, still confused. The maid once again asked the lady to forgive her. She explained that at present most of the maids were absent. That's why she came to help the lady. At the same time, she was trembling all over. Lily asked if she was hurt. The maid asked for forgiveness. The lady sat down next to her and, smiling, expressed the hope that the fragments did not hit her legs. The girl assured that not at all. The mistress looked with clear green eyes at the maid. She reminded her of her brothers and sisters. They also always worry when she is clumsy. She said that there was no need to apologize for such a trifle. Besides, the maid was scared because of her. The girl was touched by the kindness of the lady. It seemed to her that the aura next to her was sparkling, and she herself was like an angel. Lady Lily walked through the winter garden of the Duke's palace. She recalled how, the day after her wedding to her second husband, she spent the entire day lying in bed, exhausted. And now she enjoyed the greenery of rare plants and the company of a kind and helpful maid, completely in excellent spirits and well-being. And that time no one even brought her clothes, and all that time she was alone in the room, completely naked. And it was clear that the maids did not perceive her as a mistress, and they considered her an ordinary commoner from the courtyard. In conversation, Lily led the maid to introduce herself to her by name. The girl's name was Lucia. The lady thanked her. That she showed her such a wonderful place. She truly appreciated her concern and help today. Lucia remarked to herself that their duke must have married an angel, not a human. And if we talk about the gentleman, then this was quite possible. Lily sat down on a chair. She asked Lucia to say what kind of person she thought the duke was. She replied that he was simply wonderful. She said that everyone knows that for people like her, life is already a miracle. For disabled people, getting married or just working quietly is difficult because of condemnation from the outside. But their benevolent duke hires completely different people and pays them generously. Although he could be quite strict, he said that if anyone bothered his wife, he would kill him. But I still considered him the kindest in the whole world. The girl didn't know. But the duke deliberately left her in his chambers, and he called the priest because she had a fever. Lily was surprised to hear about the fever. Feeling her forehead just in case, she staggered a little, and the maid was dumbfounded. The priest yelled, "Madam!" He ran down the corridor. The girl was lying on the bed. She was unconscious. The duke asked what happened. He demanded specifics. He was interested in the cause of her illness. His priest again repeated to the master that she was completely healthy. And I was absolutely sure that the walk to the greenhouse was not the reason. That in fact that meeting with the monster on the way to the estate could have shocked and frightened her. And after the stress he experienced, the duke also found time to engage in lovemaking at night. One wounded the man in the head and the other in the heart. He expressed hope that everything would be fine with her. The priest assured that it would be so that he would not even worry. He stated that the mortality rate among patients with fever is high, but he assured of his competence, and he asked me not to doubt that the gentleman's wife would be like a cucumber. The girl on the bed mumbled something. The duke was immediately next to her. Being alarmed, he showed concern. Lady Lily woke up and opened her eyes. She was exhausted. The duke heard her weak voice. "Tristan." The duke and his priest hung on his every word. The man realized that his wife, in a feverish delirium, was calling for her younger brother, or perhaps someone else. Lady Lily begged him not to tell her father that she had come down with a fever again. She was afraid that the younger children might suffer because of this. She placed her thin hand on his chapped hand. She called him Tristan again, and the duke asked himself whether there was a place in her life for another man. He said that he understood her and would fulfill her request. Her lips smiled, but her emerald eyes were full of sadness. The girl, exhausted, closed her eyelids and dozed off. The duke was telling the priest to get going and was going to look after the girl himself today. The priest ventured to ask how long his lordship intended to leave the lady in the dark. He replied that such a fragile girl could not bear the ugliness of his appearance. He decided that his master was clearly out of his mind, since he again started talking about his imaginary ugliness. They stood near the mirror. The priest asked His Excellency with all respect, "Does he at least look in the mirror?" But he replied that there was no such need. The duke's face tensed and his pupils constricted. The man saw himself in the mirror as a monster. Wings with feathers, a tail with scales, but only in reflection he was like that. And those around him saw only his human likeness. A woman's thin hand took a cup of tea on a saucer. Lady Lily thanked the maid for her care and devotion. She asked the mistress for forgiveness that, due to her carelessness, she lost consciousness while walking in the greenhouse. The girl assured the maid that everything was fine and it was not her fault. She wondered where her nanny was, because she hadn't seen her for a long time. She didn't mind her disappearance, but she was still curious. Lucia replied that, according to rumors, the one who accompanied the lady when she arrived was put outside the door on the day the lady herself arrived. She sat under the gate and called on her mistress to forgive her. The girl could not say exactly how accurate this information was. The lady insisted that everything was fine. She decided to ask about it herself. There was a knock on the door. A male voice asked Miss for permission to enter. The man was sitting opposite at the tea table. Lily said that it was only thanks to him that she felt great. She apologized for not introducing herself to him properly. The man replied that it was not worth it, that he should have asked her forgiveness for his lack of proper manners. He said he was glad to meet you, and he introduced himself that his name was Ivan Kirchen, that he is the faithful priest of their duke. The girl said that she could only thank him for such a speedy recovery. The priest replied that it would be sad if the duke lost the head of another servant. His interlocutor was horrified that the duke could kill a servant just because she had a fever. The man asked him to believe that there was much more than one servant and this was a great loss. After all, they were worthy and good people. Lady Lily was horrified. And then it turned out that Lucia was also in danger. The priest asserted with a sad look that only a miracle helped her escape. The girl was at a loss. She asked how it was possible to be so cruel. But the priest laughed back at her, saying that he was joking. Lily was completely at a loss, and the man laughed at his own joke that the lady was so easily led and believed him. He laughed heartily, but Lily sat with a gloomy face. She argued that it was indecent for a servant of God to stoop to such lies, even for the sake of an absurd joke. He argued that he should not be confused with the stuffy priests with bald crowns. They were part of the Condé religion, and he, with his chic hairstyle, belonged to the order of the Hickster. He asked him to be considered just a poor fellow, a priest, who followed his master from one battlefield to another. The lady asked if he was satisfied with everything in his life and service to Mr. Duke. After all, he still remained faithful to the Duke and God. She looked at the tea in her cup and thought, after all, according to her sources, no one is forced to become a military priest. Therefore, I believed that his words should be treated with caution, and divided their meaning into two. A man in holy orders addressed Miss. He claimed that before meeting her, he imagined her image a little differently than he now saw in front of him. He thought it would be good if she and the Duke succeeded in everything and supported each other. Lily asked the priest what the Duke was like in his opinion. I asked him to sincerely express his point of view. She timidly sipped her tea, holding the cup with both hands. She understood that the Duke had seen her weakness even on their wedding night, and she was afraid that if the Duke lost all desire to be near the one who could not bear a healthy child. The man thought this was impossible, and he was surprised that she still had not seen the Duke's face. She replied that even though they spent the night together. However, she doesn't even know what his appearance is. She was either blindfolded or he was standing behind her, not allowing her to turn to face him. The priest grabbed his head. He asked her not to continue. He thought that everything was clear. He asked her to understand that the Duke was too modest, and the gentleman believed that such a fragile girl could not bear the ugliness of his appearance. It looked like he simply developed a complex due to false pretense. This is how things stood according to the priest. After his frank statement, he thought a little, but then he suddenly stood up and shouted that this needed to be stopped. The surprise scared the girl a little. He claimed that he would help her if she really wanted to see His Majesty's face. The room was brightly lit by the rays of the sun. The maid idolized her mistress. She claimed that if she were in the Duke's place, she would immediately fall in love. After all the things on Lady Lily looked simply amazing. She thought the coat was meant to be as eye-catching as possible. The girl turned around at the conversation of two maids who, without hesitation in sign language, discussed her outfit and appearance. She found herself wanting to talk to them, too. She decided to ask Buttercup to teach her sign language. And at that time, the girl was bringing another gorgeous dress for her to try on. And when the lady put on a robe with fur, the girl asked what Milady thought about this outfit. She replied that he was simply perfect. She had never thought before that one day she would be able to wear such luxurious things. It looked like it belonged to the Emperor's own family, and the maid claimed that Lord Isles had connections with the Imperial Palace, and it was through him that the Duke was able to get these beautiful things. She claimed that this was the minimum that the daughter of a wealthy merchant deserves. The mute maid clarified with gestures that Lord Isles was now officially a nobleman. After all, he has already opened 3 diamond mines. He must have been quite wealthy. Lucia interpreted sign language into words. Lily said it was great news. After all, if she had rejected this marriage, her father would never have been allowed to have connections with the Imperial Palace. Moreover, not to mention the opening of those mines, there was a huge amount of jewelry with stones on the table, boxes, tablets, and just a scattering of women's cosmetics mixed in. There was a knock on their door. All 3 girls became wary, turning their attention to the doors. The priest looked into the slightly open crack. He asked my lady if she was ready. Lady Lily came out, followed by his lordship's priest. He showed her the knight's training ground. He walked clearly on the tiles, and my lady soon trotted after him, barely keeping up. She was worried about how she looked and what I would think when I saw how she was dressed. After all, she had no reason to be in such a luxurious form. Suddenly, there was a sharp sound of a shot. The lady and the priest stopped, frozen. Lily clarified whether it was the sound of a shot. She was worried that the Duke might be injured. One of the knights came out to meet them, claiming that now is the height of training. I asked what made them think it would be a great idea to bring a civilian here, and a woman at that. He asked the monk if he was in his right mind to bring a sick princess here. The man was broad-shouldered. On his belt he held an impressively sized combat sword. He began to smile at my lady and asked if she was okay. He reassured her that that shot was only part of their planned training, and no one was hurt during it. The girl thought that the people in this castle cared too much about the Duchess. She said that she was relieved to accept his assurances as the truth. She asked how she could find out his name, inviting the knight to introduce himself to her. The guy was a little confused and didn't immediately know what to answer to the beautiful Lady Duchess. The knight gallantly kissed the Duchess's hand. He introduced himself by name. His name was Johannes Tallinn, and he offered his services to my lady. Lily remembered how on the way, on the orders of the commander, it was he who escorted her to the gates of the mansion on the first day. The guy was surprised that that incident was so deeply etched in the mistress's memory. He claimed that there were many rumors about her beauty. And now I saw with my own eyes that she is truly beautiful. And if the Duke ever started a war in the name of his wife, he could completely understand. Tallinn said that when the ruler of the Eastern Empire set his sights on the granddaughter of the Marquis, then the whole country plunged into chaos. And now he fully understood the Marquis's sentiments. Lady Lily asked to stop. After all, he had already made her completely blush with embarrassment. He realized that they should change the subject. And the priest stood next to him, looking displeased. The girl widened her eyes at what she saw. The man raised the barrel and fired the gun. She clarified with Sir Tallinn that they needed more gunpowder. She thought she had seen this before. His lordship's priest intervened in their conversation. He was tired of standing for furniture during their conversation. He argued that such deep knowledge was to be expected from their Duchess, Milady Lily. He argued that the potential of gunpowder was simply enormous, that if short-barreled weapons become widespread, then even old people and children will be able to protect themselves. The knight fired a test-blank shot into the air before their eyes. Tallinn waved his hand to him as a sign of gratitude for what he showed them. Tallinn expressed doubts about the advisability of such a distribution. After all, this could mean that the risk of shootings would increase. Lady Lily agreed that weapons were a serious topic of discussion. After all, she remembered that when her brothers were very small, even a slingshot could cause trouble. Tallinn was amazed at her thoughtfulness. He told my lady that her wisdom was in no way inferior to her beauty. The priest laughingly spoke to Sir Tallinn, and he dared to declare to him that my lady had chosen an unworthy husband. And at this time another man was approaching from behind the priest. His gaze was unkind and his eyebrows were furrowed. The priest turned around at the sound of approaching heavy footsteps, and he began to stutter and say that they were here on an excursion. The girl looked upset. She understood that from the very beginning she was only a nuisance here. The man was taller than everyone else. He asked dryly what they were doing here. Lily asked to be forgiven for interrupting their training. She assured that she did not want to disturb them in any way. She claimed that she came here to see her husband. She had a pleading look. The girl, out of embarrassment and indecision, squeezed the hem of her chic dress with her fingers. The man looked at her with a steely, emotionless gaze. The girl continued to make excuses, that they got married a few days ago, and she still hadn't seen his face. The man was silent. He turned his piercing gaze to Tallinn. His eyes told the knight, "Do something about it." He immediately read the silent order of the senior in rank. He cleared his throat and asked for my lady's forgiveness. He expressed his regrets and asked her to obey the Duke's orders and leave the training ground. The priest assured that he would take responsibility for what happened, since it was his initiative to bring Lady Lily here. The girl was completely confused by what was happening between the men. She resolutely declared that she was a duchess, and came here of her own free will to see her husband. She didn't want anyone to be punished for her decision. She asked in a commanding voice that the commander would really dare to disobey her order. Tallinn was amazed, and the priest's jaw dropped completely. Lily continued, that there is no woman in the world who will trust a husband who does not want to show her his face. She asked the commander if he agreed with her. And a few minutes earlier, in front of the Duke stood 2 knights on the training ground. He asked them not to neglect those knights who suffered during the war, and he ordered to take care of them and their families. He said that preparations for tomorrow's expedition must go flawlessly. But then from a distance he saw his wife in the company of a priest, and Tallinn and the gate to the site. His Lily chirped flirtatiously with the knight, and he clearly sympathized with her. He asked what kind of fool could let Ivan in here. After all, he himself knew very well that the girl had been lying in bed with a high fever until yesterday. The guilty gatekeeper apologized to him, but he claimed that his lordship's priest insisted on it. The Duke said that he had already forgotten and decided to figure it out himself. He hurriedly went down the steps, and his wife at this time smiled sweetly at his interlocutor. And now she was screaming at him, and she asked if he agreed with her decisive position to finally see her husband. She declared that there was no woman in the world who would trust a man who did not want to show all of himself. She argued that a husband who cannot be trusted is the worst thing you can imagine. The man listened to her, turning away. The man's gaze was fierce. The priest, seeing this, involuntarily shuddered. He gesticulated through the air so that he would say that this was the Duke's order, that as soon as she returned to the castle, he would follow her. Talon asked my lady to follow him. He assured her that as soon as she returned to the castle, the Duke would soon meet her there. Lady Lily agreed to their terms and listened to Sir Talon. She realized that she still would not receive an answer to her questions and complaints from the captain. She asked me to tell the Duke that she would no longer try to see him. Her voice was choked with disappointment at her failure. These words hit the Duke like a whip in the face. His wife's harsh words hurt his feelings. Lady Lily turned around and walked away the same way she came here. Talon called out to her, catching up. He asked to be allowed to accompany her because it was dangerous to go alone. The girl rushed up the stairs, picking up the hem of her dress. She thought that the Duke was angry with her that she had disobeyed his order, and yet she did not think that his game of hide-and-seek from his own wife could continue like this. She walked around the room from corner to corner, puffing with irritation. She could not understand why her husband did not want to show her his face. She was afraid that he might already hate her. She was resilient to many things. After all, she was used to this during her first marriage, and during the second she got used to loneliness. She assumed that this time it would be the same. A male voice called her name coming from behind. Then she heard her husband's hurried steps. The girl did not dare turn to him, so as not to violate his request. He asked Lily to forgive him. The lady replied that he was late and very late. The Duke replied that he followed her as quickly as he could, but he kept his distance from her so as not to scare her. He hugged his wife tightly from behind. He claimed that he couldn't let her leave like that in a grudge against him. The man shaded her eyes with his weathered palm, and the girl realized that he would again hide his face from her. The man promised that as soon as he earned her trust, he would immediately show himself to her. The girl asked again, clarifying what it means it won't be this time. The Duke promised Lily that he would spend the whole night with her if she wished. With a whistle, he turned her towards him and began to kiss her forehead. She called her husband, Your Grace. But he asked her to call him by his first name. Vlad, I wanted her to call him. He suggested forgetting about their titles. After all, she called Talon by name. She turned to him. Vlad, you don't have to worry about how I address others. Besides, she only saw him at night. The girl held him by the cloak near his waist. She recalled that during all their meetings she was always blindfolded. The Duke's silent question hung in the air. The man picked her up, tearing her off the floor. He asked her to close her eyes. The Duke took the girl in his arms and carried her carefully. He said that right now he would show her even more than necessary. She replied that this was not what she wanted. But now it didn't matter. His steps echoed down the corridor. Lily suggested out loud that it must be hard for him to carry her, but the man assured her that she was as light as a feather, and he laughed at her assumptions. The door creaked. The Duke carried his wife in his arms into the chambers. He claimed that this room was not as luxurious as her chambers, and he admitted that this was his office, and this meant that no one except them could enter here. The doors behind them closed with a thud. The Duke stopped and put the girl on her feet. He looked at the girl, and her eyes were closed. The man asked his wife why she protected Ivan. He looked at her face with interest, holding her chin with his hands. The long braid lay partly in its wave on his desk. Lily replied that she did not protect Ivan, but only wanted to find him, her husband. He bent her over to lie down on the table. He said that he understood everything that was happening around him. He claimed he knew, that it was the priest who suggested that she go out and find him to try to see him in person. The girl asked how he could know everything in the world, but he interrupted her, and he said that she herself heard what he said on the training ground. The Duke leaned towards his wife. The girl thought that how could it be that she didn't see him, but he seemed so familiar to her. She suddenly opened her eyes, and in front of her was the same commander. He looked at her point blank and asked who Lily was looking for. "That he's here in front of her now," he said, holding her cheek. The man addressed his wife in kind words, surprised that she could not see him with her own eyes. He held her hand, and the girl lay staring at him with her green eyes without blinking. A flash flashed in the girl's eyes. She opened her eyelids, realizing that it was just a dream. She sat in bed, covering herself with a blanket and being completely confused. Lily sat at the table and leisurely had breakfast. There were many delicious dishes laid out: whole chicken, lobster, vegetables, fruits, herbs, sauces, drinks for every taste. The girl turned to the only maid, clarifying that she alone should really eat it all. She answered in the affirmative, adding that the Duke himself ordered this. She poured tea for the girl, telling her that he was from her homeland, and it will allow her to relax a little. The lady sighed sadly. She said that this tea was sent again by her father, looking at her reflection in the cup. Once upon a time, the nanny said that the girl's father gave her a special tea, that he will be calm only when she tells him that she drank it all. The girl took the ear of the cup with trembling hands. This tea was so hard to drink. A suitcase was placed on the cabinet and its lock clicked. The doctor said that there was nothing serious, so there was no need to worry in vain. But the girl did not understand why she became so weak. The doctor apologized that he could not find the exact cause of her condition. But even though her personal maid was not there, she knew that she could not relax. The food here was simply amazing. But she will have to give up tea. The girl slid back the cup onto the saucer. Talon assured the lady that she had nothing to worry about. The girl had previously been served only by Lucia, and she was a little surprised by the sudden appearance of the Duke's knight without a report. The guy assured that the Duke himself chose this tea. He opened the box and examined the leaves before deciding on its quality. His Excellency's knight assured that all dishes served on the table were also personally checked by the Duke for the presence of poison. The maid confirmed that he tried everything before allowing him to serve. It seemed to Lily that her husband cared about her very much, even though she didn't do anything for him. She remembered that ridiculous dream. When I saw my husband's face, it turned out to be the commander of the knights. Lady Lily suddenly blushed. When the maid saw him, she became very worried about her mistress. Talon also could not understand what happened. He said he just remembered. "What did they ask you to convey about the arrival of the madam's family?" "They arrived this morning." Lily was delighted to see her brothers arrive, but she didn't know that they were going to visit her. For her, it was a completely unexpected visit from her relatives. She suggested that they were still having a hard time without her help and support. A deep line of sadness crossed Lady Lily's face. She decided to change the topic of their conversation. She asked Talon what Vlad usually does when uninvited guests come to him. The knight became thoughtful. He wanted to choose softer words so as not to frighten or offend his mistress. After hesitating, he still had to answer that he, in principle, did not treat guests very well, whether invited or not. A man of enormous stature, strong and broad in the shoulders, categorically refused to fulfill the request. He argued that if his lordship had not given permission, the answer was no. He told Sir Talon this because how could he not know himself? A bandage covered his damaged eye and hair covered most of his face. The knight claimed that the Duchess herself came out to greet her family, and he once again asked the thug to open the gate for them. He mockingly claimed that the Duchess was just a commoner who had managed to marry a nobleman. He looked at the procession. A carriage drawn by 4 horses slowly drove up to the gate. He thought that the Duke's wife must now be trying to sneak her entire family into the castle in order to get the Duke out of there. The air crackled with the growing tension between the men. Talon shouted at the gatekeeper that the Duchess was waiting at the carriage, and he was obliged to open the gate. That he is disrespecting my lady, that they all swore allegiance to her. But the big man didn't want to listen to him. He claimed that the lady arrived to them 3 months earlier than expected, and this brought them a lot of problems. At this time, the carriage swayed and Lady Lily came out. Both men waited for further developments with the fate of the Duchess, and the girl was like the most tender heavenly creature. Standing between his lordship's 2 knights, she seemed even more fragile. She greeted Count Walcus with joy. He bent down on one knee, acknowledging her superiority. He said he was honored. He introduced himself according to all his titles, offering his services. The Count glanced at the lady briefly. He told himself that even though she was lovely, it didn't change the fact that her family showed up unannounced. He promised himself to still remain on the alert. He convinced himself that it was better to be hated for his integrity than for his lack of confidence. Continuing to kneel before the Duchess, the girl turned into a thug. The man was sure that she would start screaming at him, but she calmly asserted that she appreciated his genuine concern for the safety of his master and Cadiz as a whole. He looked at her tender features and was touched by her tenderness. He admitted that there was much more greatness in the girl than he had originally imagined. Lady Lily asked his forgiveness that her arrival had led to an argument. Count Valkis coughed in response. The girl claimed that she came here to send her family home. The gatekeeper was surprised to hear this. She argued that disrespecting the Duchess in front of her master's man was not the wisest way to prove his loyalty. The Count chuckled. He claimed that he understood everything, that the Duchess came here to send her relatives out, not to let them in. Lily confirmed the correctness of his guesses. She assured that she respects the Duke and his preferences, and she invited the Count to open the gate for her and let her carriage through. The thug bowed to the girl. He asked my lady's forgiveness for the disrespect shown. He shouted at the armored guards to move to obey her ladyship's orders. Lily breathed a sigh of relief. Talon looked at his mistress with delight. He was surprised by her determination and tact in dealing with the rude lout at the gate. He smiled, glad that the dispute was resolved in their favor. A blonde guy was hurrying towards the girl. He waved his hand and called Lily. The Duchess was glad to see Brother Dandelion. She hurried to meet him. The brother jumped and galloped his way to his sister in order to embrace her in his strong embrace. He told her that he missed her a lot. The girl asked if everything was okay with him. She wondered where their brother Loki was. He replied that he had been a little busy lately, and instead of him, he took Tristan as his traveling companion. The man stepped off the carriage and it swayed a little. The brother and sister were both ash blonde with green eyes and looked very similar to each other. They waited until the third one joined them. Tristan was tall and strong in the shoulders. His brown hair fell in curls over his face. Sharp facial features with expressive gray eyes showed him to be a man of character. He reached out to kiss her hand, and he said that it was a great joy for him to meet the Duchess of Winter, gallantly kissing her hand. Lily said that she had not seen him for a long time. The man turned away. He said her dress looked beautiful, and he made the assumption that her husband treated her well. In response, the girl only rustled the hem of her dress, demonstrating its splendor. She confirmed his suspicions. Even though she only recently arrived here, she claimed that she had already managed to settle down here. My brother was glad to hear this, but for some unknown reason he suddenly shuddered, and he fearfully told how on the way here through the carriage window, he saw a severed head hanging under the bridge. Dandelion then thought that this place was simply terrifying, and he asked the coachman to speed up the horses with his whip. The brother turned around, pointing his gaze at Talon. He said that he had the impression that that knight would cut off his head if for his reason the girl shed even one tear. His lordship's knight stood at a distance from the Duchess and her brothers. His gaze was icy. The girl told her brother that such things should not be said, and Tristana asked my lady why don't they continue their conversation inside. She answered him, sighing, that she was glad that they had come such a long way to see her, but she asked her to understand that she could not invite them to the castle. She stopped the hand that wanted to caress her. Lady Lily asked them to return when they received permission from the Duke to stay in his mansion. She explained that they needed permission to enter Cadiz, but she said that the Duke was now on an expedition, so she has no way to contact him. Tristan was surprised that the main woman in this castle really doesn't have the authority to invite her family or friends to visit her. The man was annoyed that the Duke was such a person. The brunette was sitting on the first bench closest to the altar. A lady in white robes came out to meet him. She asked why he was the only one who came to the base of his knights. The brunette squinted his steel-colored eyes, answering that they were chasing monsters. His interlocutor, as always, invariably smiled. Her gray hair fell over her shoulders, and her dry arms were hidden under her wide sleeves. The Duke explained that the war was over, so the number of pure fighters was decreasing, and his people, who had recently shared the battlefield with him, now dared to brazenly flirt with his wife. The woman chuckled. She said that the Duke spent more than 10 years on the battlefield with his men, and the fact that his wife had a nice conversation with his subordinate is surprising. What became such a serious problem for him? The Duke asked if this was bad. The long liver said that she would never have thought that he could get angry for such a reason, and she assumed that these were the advantages of a long life. The Duke stood up and was about to leave. He said that he saw her in a good mood and he briefly said goodbye to her. She spoke after the departing person, that books written in Braille are a wonderful thing, and thanks to his lordship, the children are doing great too. Vlad narrowed his eyes. He understood the woman's words in his own way. This meant that the princess was still alive. The gates swayed. The knight opened them wide and entered. The Duke asked what brought him here. The man explained using sign language that a request was received regarding permission to travel to the castle territory. Vlad suggested that it could be the imperial family, and while the princess's head remained untouched, he asked him to tell them to get out, if they don't want to start a war with him. But the speaker stopped the Duke, who was about to leave. He clarified that the Isles family had arrived. The Duke was lost in thought. He continued that the Duchess's brothers arrived without warning. Therefore, his lordship asked how best they should deal with those who had arrived. Vlad left everything to his wife's discretion. Carriages and carts with cargo waited in line to be allowed through the gate. Tristan asked the girl if her new husband was treating her well. They walked along the park path and had a pleasant conversation about various news. The girl replied that with her husband she appreciated his tolerance and care, but she claimed that there was still a lot she didn't know. But this little thing she has now still brings her relief. The man muttered something under his breath. There was a pause in their conversation. Lily asked Tristan what was bothering him so much. She held him by the edge of his jacket and he turned back. But he assured the girl that he just seemed to be worrying about her in vain. Tulips grew thickly in the flower bed. Just at this time there was active flowering. The man claimed that these flowers reminded him of when they were younger, and she cried for the only time then. The girl sat on the bed and sobbed. The man was next to her. She was in tears and told Tristan that she didn't want to get married, that she couldn't bear to be separated from them. And then he was thoughtful. After all, he couldn't influence it in any way. The man grabbed her hand and placed a tulip flower in her palm. He promised her that one day he could become rich. And then he was going to give her a much more luxurious bouquet of flowers. The man smiled and was determined to change his life and his girl's for the better. He said that he considered it better to marry a friend than someone whose face he had never seen, referring to himself as her husband. The girl sincerely laughed at his childish reasoning. She asked Tristan how he was sure that she would want to marry him. Lady Lily laughed. She couldn't believe that Tristan still remembered this all that time, carrying the moment of their revelation in his memory. The man continued to joke. He said that since then his face has hardly become more handsome. The girl could tell him one thing for sure, that he was still able to make her laugh. Tristan remained serious, and the girl was amazed. She was hit as if by a whip. He brought his face closer to hers. I asked what she thought. Is he cuter than her current husband? Lady Lily hesitated a bit with her answer. She replied that her husband was quite ordinary, but her husband's appearance was not important to her. The girl looked away, and for some time she was sad and thoughtfully silent. Tristan saw that the girl was not saying something, trying to hide something about him that worried her greatly. And he said that he sees her lies. Her eyes widened. The man carefully began to ask her, has she really not seen her husband's face yet? The setting sun painted the sky and the castle in scarlet and purple tones. There was the sound of footsteps on the paved path. Vlad stood holding his horse by the bridle. He watched his wife through the window. He was satisfied with what he saw. Lady Lily walked nervously from corner to corner, not knowing what she should do. She had a bandage in her right hand and a candle in her left. She doubted whether this decision would really be the right one. She recalled Tristan's advice to disobey her husband. When will the Duke realize that she doesn't care about his appearance? Then they will be able to resolve all other misunderstandings between themselves. Lily clutched the bandage in her hand. She decided that she would no longer have to close her eyes in the presence of her husband. She was on her knees and hiding a candle under the bed, just to catch a glimpse of your spouse's face while he sleeps. The girl sat on the edge of the bed and waited. She should never have gotten caught, and for this she needed to behave as usual. Her husband was due to arrive shortly. She began to tie the blindfold over her eyes. The man entered. He watched the girl from afar. He praised her for her humility and beauty, and he laughed heartily, looking forward to spending time with her. The girl called him. She asked his lordship for forgiveness, and she assured that she could not tie the bandage properly. The man approached her. He reminded her that for her he is just Vlad. Meanwhile, he helped with tying a strong knot of ribbon at the back of her head. Her heart began to beat faster. She was surprised that the sound of the heartbeat was hers, and she couldn't understand why she became so nervous. The Duke assured that everything was ready with the bandage, and played with her blonde strands of hair. The girl excitedly asked if he was injured. After all, she had heard that during the expedition they always encountered monsters. The man's face was tense. He knelt next to the hem of her skirt. I was surprised that this was exactly what she was worried about while she was here alone. The girl timidly insisted that this was so. After all, she was his wife. The Duke knelt before her and held her hands. He said that on their first night he believed that her worries were nothing more than groundless fears. He gently touched her fingers. Lily touched his cheek. She asked what had changed now. He replied that now this feature of her seemed sweet to him in its own way. The girl was lying on the bed, covered with a blanket. On the other side of the bed, a man was sleeping with his head turned away. She opened her eyes and listened to her husband's breathing. It was clear from everything that he was already fast asleep. She thought that this was the first time she had seen his sleeping silhouette. Her husband always left before she woke up in the morning. The Duke heard his wife get out of bed. He opened his eyes, listening to her further actions. The girl began to look under the bed for the candlestick that she had been preparing in the evening, feeling for its location there. She told herself that she would only look at his face for a second, and at that very moment she would put out the candle flame. Her eyes brightened when she found the candle. Lily just thought that now she needed some light. As Vlad also stood up, his eyes flashed with the red glow of a hungry beast. The girl shuddered. He immediately covered her eyes with his palm. The candle fell from her hands onto the blanket. She called him by name. The Duke quickly pushed her onto her back and straddled her on top, taking the leading position. He said that it seemed his wife was ready to face the consequences of her actions. His eyes looked like red coals in the darkness. The girl's heart beat rapidly in her chest. He still kept his hand on her eyelids. He asked if she was ready to look at him. The man removed his hand from her eyelids. He argued that if she was willing to pay for this, she should know. His eyes glowed with lights in the darkness. That as soon as she sees the true him, then her marriage will become much worse than it was in complete ignorance. The girl did not open her eyelids. She said she was very scared. She was more than sure that Vlad was in front of her. But at the same time, it's as if he's not him at all. He looked down at her. The girl said that she wanted to prove that his appearance did not bother her at all. The Duke wiped away a tear that had come through the girl's closed eyelids. He was sure that it was her brothers who forced her to prove something, either to him or to them. Lily claimed that it was her wish too. The Duke realized its logic and correctness. He said that meant their marriage was no different. He understood that it was difficult for her to confront her loved ones. Therefore, she reluctantly decided to marry him. And those caresses and her experiences were only a distraction. He reproached that he expected something more from his wife, whom he himself did not trust. The Duke was well aware that Lily was forced to marry him. Therefore, he was very upset. Having wished his wife good night, he decided to leave her alone to rest until the morning. The man left the room. His wife screamed and asked him to stop, but he didn't even turn around and the door closed behind him with a thud. Lily was left alone in the bedroom. She sat on the bed, partially covered with a blanket, thinking about her husband. The three maids walked along the corridor. One said that her ladyship was simply amazing. She was amazed how she managed to adapt to so many servants so quickly. The other one was not at all surprised. After all, the Lady Duchess was the daughter of Lord Isles. It was nothing new for her to interact with hired people, but the first one believed that Lady Lily's merits were still difficult to overestimate. And she understood why everyone liked her so much. A man was spying on them. It was Tristan. The girls moved away. One of them said that she had heard about the things that the lady received from the imperial family. The man took a hesitant step. Mentally, he asked Lily for forgiveness, but he was going to go against his conscience. It was already morning. The sun's rays brightly illuminated the room. The girl was still in her nightwear, rubbing her sleepy eyes. She thought that for some reason she could not sleep a wink. An envelope with a message was waiting for her on the table. She was a little surprised to see him here. Lily opened the letter and began to quickly read its contents. Her eyes widened at his content. "Dearest Lily, I'm afraid that I won't be in the castle today due to important matters. Please don't wait for me in the evening. I probably won't be back until nightfall. I'll leave Talon with you. You can give him orders." The Duke walked between the rows of shops. He sat down on the front of them and folded his hands in prayer. The man sat deep in thought for some time. A man's hand plucked leaves from a branch. He decided whether or not to wake the girl, and the twig with leaves was like a daisy for making decisions. The man could wait no longer. He pushed the door to the lady's room and wished her good morning. The girl looked up from the paper with her husband's message. Lily put the letter back in the envelope, called Talon to come through. Ivan sat in a waddle. He had difficulty putting on his shirt and had a bandage on his injured shoulder. He advised the interlocutor to tell his wife everything, and finally ease his soul. The Duke replied that his advice was absurd. He wanted an optimal solution, not an empty answer. Ivan admitted that he was risking his life by telling his lordship about this, but he believed that his wife might ask for a divorce. Vlad held his temples from their excessive pulsation. He narrowed his eyes, realizing the priest's insolence. Ivan was already buttoning his shirt. He asked to give the girl a chance to see her husband's face since she was so striving for it. The Duke grabbed Ivan by the shirt and began to threaten him with his eyes, but he admitted that the girl was already thinking about their separation. The clergyman flew towards the wall and hurt himself painfully against it. Afterwards, he rubbed the back of his head with his hand and complained that it hurt him so much. The Duke came closer to Ivan. He claimed that it was not in vain that he was sent on that expedition, and if he even once dares to talk about his wife like that. He sharply hit the wall next to his head with his hand. The man promised that people would admire Ivan's head, suspended from the ceiling of the castle. For greater clarity, tapping your finger with your finger. Vlad turned around at the sound of approaching steps. Lily approached the men, concerned for both of them. Ivan stammered and asked my lady what brought her here. The girl was scared and pressed her hand to her lips. She assured that she was going to go to confession. Her maid Lucia, seeing the picture, became completely overwhelmed. She thought to herself that all handsome men were either already married or in love with each other. The lady was confused. She claimed that she didn't even realize that the commander and father Ivan, but he didn't let her finish. He claimed that the lady had misunderstood everything. The girl replied that she respected their preferences, and with that she promised to leave them alone, making the sweetest and most innocent grimace. Lily picked up the hem of her dress and ran away. Father Ivan shouted the most untranslatable words after her. He asked my lady to wait. After all, his interlocutor had something to tell her. The gate swung open and the girl flew away like an arrow. Then she tried to comprehend what she had recently seen. It looked like those men loved each other. Soon the brunette caught up with her. He shouted after her to wait for him, addressing her as, "Dearest Lily." The girl was surprised by such treatment from the captain of the knights. She paused. Lily turned around at the sound of a man's voice. Her eyes were wide open, and the man blamed Ivan for everything. The woman's shoes clicked as the girl approached the man. She asked the commander if she could ask him a question. He turned his head to the side so as not to look into her eyes, and he hesitated in indecision with the answer. Lady Lily tugged at his cloak. She claimed that if he did not want to talk to her, then they could communicate using sign language. The girl duplicated what was said with hand gestures, but the man continued to stand in front of her silently. Lily claimed that she was just studying while gesticulating. Therefore, I asked her to forgive me if sometimes she began to speak. The man answered with his fingers that he understood her. She asked if he had accidentally left a letter in her chambers. The man's eyes flashed. The girl expressed the assumption that he was Vlad. The man froze without giving her an answer. Lily remembered the postscript in that letter in the afterword. The husband wrote that if she meets the commander, then she should not be afraid or afraid of him. She was then surprised by such a special attitude towards her subordinate. She also remembered that he had asked her earlier why she was protecting Ivan. That just one conversation with the military priest made her husband so jealous. And now the jealous Vlad asked his wife to trust the man with whom she, although she sometimes crossed paths, knew very little. Lady Lily thought for a moment. She crossed paths with him for the first time when they were attacked by a monster along the way. Then when Vlad caught up with her from the training ground, he called his wife Lily, but he hugged her from behind so that she could not see his face. And now the commander's voice and his unique and significantly different from the other's address made the girl think. Lily looked at the man intently and appraisingly. She couldn't be wrong, it was definitely the voice of her husband. The girl spoke, watching his reaction. Is it possible that he is her husband, Duke Vlad? The man froze. Her heart was beating wildly, although he knew how to control himself like no one else. He didn't know where to start, and how to explain to a girl. But Lily had already apologized to the commander. She said she just found out he was married, and therefore the way he just called out to her, she could simply have heard it. She asked for forgiveness and said that she felt like a complete idiot. The man thought that, of course, Lily was unlikely to believe that a man with such a face could be her husband. The girl asked if he could accompany her to the castle, that Sir Talon promised to wait for her nearby, but now she doesn't see him anywhere. The man walked with the girl next to him. She looked at him unobtrusively. She told herself that she would have to pretend that she didn't know anything until he told her everything. But she also knew that they definitely had a lot to talk about. The wind was blowing, shaking the tree branches. The girl shivered. She said that she forgot her coat at Sir Talon's, that it was worth listening to him and not taking off your outerwear in church. The man, without further ado, threw his clothes over her shoulders. Lily thanked him for his concern. She voiced the assumption that this was such an order from the Duke. She made eyes at him. The girl walked accompanied by a man right under the mansion building. She turned her attention to the snowman. She sat down next to the snowy figure. She said that she often sculpted these with her brothers when she was a child. She looked at the snowman with emotion. Lily touched the leaf on the head of the snowy figure. She said that he was so cute and such a charm. But then the unexpected happened. Part of the snowman's face fell off. The girl did not know that the twig would fall off. The man handed her a twig, which he picked up next to the figurine. He stood next to the snowman and the girl, leaning on one knee. Lily asked the commander not to tell her that it was he who made that snowman. The girl laughed. She asked her to forgive her, but it would be difficult for her to imagine such a thing. The man's gaze betrayed his emotions. Lady Lily has already returned the missing part of the figurine to its place. She asked the man to evaluate her improvements. After all, now the snowman was smiling. She promised to keep their games with the snowman a secret. After all, if the Duke finds out, he won't be happy about it. The man began to write something on the snow untouched by human footprints. Lily turned her full attention to that. A question was written about what my lady's thoughts were. The girl took the wand from his hands. She somehow never thought that they could communicate in this way. Lily began to write in the same way in the fresh snow. If you are brave, everything will come. The man read in the snow. The Duke thought that his courage had never been questioned, and it looked like he couldn't win against Lily. But he smiled at his wife's resourcefulness. The girl said that when they meet again, she will say this phrase to him using sign language, and she promised to try hard to get lessons from Lucia. She said that since she trusted him, she asked him to trust her back. The man's heart was ready to jump out of his chest. The same thing happened with Lily. The man said that not being afraid of him did not mean that you had to look at him with such a sweet look. He rose from his knees and stood at his full, enormous height next to the girl. The moon with a horned cow illuminated the sky above the castle. The girl was accompanied by a man, and Lily seems to be a little cold. The man ordered a hot bath to be prepared for her. Lily said, "Vlad, my hand," and put her cold palm in his hand. He was surprised that she was so cold. The man offered his other hand. He said that she must also want to warm her other hand. The servants were all astonished by what they saw. They had round eyes and slack jaws. Lady Lily suggested they talk inside the mansion, and the maids gasped after them with joy for their masters. Lucia caring for her mistress's hair. She said that she didn't even know that the Duke had such a side of his character. What the girl can't even imagine is how surprised everyone was at what they saw. She claimed that it was thanks to the emotions of affection and love of the masters that the atmosphere in the castle was so lively. Lily answered Dandelion sincerely that she also likes living here, and this was thanks to a faithful and caring maid. The girl laughingly claimed that she had never met someone like her mistress, my lady, before, and she asked how she cultivated this generosity in herself, and her family too. The girl was a little alarmed by Lucia's phrase about family. After all, she saw her brother outside the castle. She was asking if Dandelion had done anything wrong. The maid clarified that if the mistress is talking about a man with a ponytail, then not at all. That he didn't do anything wrong. I just asked a few questions. For example, how many servants are there in the palace? How much do girls earn? Do they like working here and all that stuff? Lucia hesitated a little. She began to say the rest into the mistress's ear with a most serious face. Lily was horrified by what she heard from the maid, and she decided for herself that she needed to see Tristan at all costs. The men were unloading barrels from a huge cart. Tristan stood with a sheet of paper, checking the goods he had received. Lady Lily called him by name. He was a little surprised by her coming to such a place. The girl joyfully ran towards him. She clarified whether it was cargo from the capital, and she claimed that she could take everything from here herself. After all, it was her duty as the main lady of the family. She asked her to forgive her. The man put the list behind his back. He argued that it might be difficult for her, and he promised that he would do everything himself. Guaranteed the safety of all items during transportation. The girl was in earnest. She said that even if this was so, then she... The man interrupted her. He suggested they talk inside. They left the movers to deal with the barrels, and they themselves went into the castle and drank tea. Lily said he wasn't acting like his usual self today. She took a sip of tea and put the cup on the saucer. The man retorted, answering that he did not feel that anything in him had suddenly changed. The girl said sympathetically that it seemed to her as if he was in pain. She asked what was bothering him so much, which could be putting too much pressure on yourself. The man replied that lately, to be honest, he couldn't sleep at all, and all because he is very worried about her. The girl interrupted him. She claimed that she had something to tell him. He asked if she had seen her husband's face. The girl answered in the affirmative, remembering a moment from the past day. So she believed that her father no longer had any reason to worry. She argued that in any case there was a more important topic for their conversation. Tristan, hearing the icy notes in the girl's voice, narrowed his eyes. After all, my father once spoke, reasoning that his daughter is no different from the others, and thus Lily is the same as all the courtesans Tristan has been with before. And he asked the man to make sure that the girl did not become pregnant before his return, with hope, entrusting him with a difficult task. Tristan asked Lily not to tell him that she had already entered the servants' quarters. The man was angry and angry. The man held the handrail of the guest chair tightly with his hand. He asked that if she heard everything, then... The girl interrupted him without allowing him to finish. She reminded him that he was here as her guest, and she convincingly asked him to respect the people living here. Tristan couldn't stand it. He lost his nerve. He placed his hands on the table with a crash. He convinced her that she was very naive, and he doesn't know what's going on here, and she has no idea what her husband really thinks about her. He walked around the table, coming closer to the girl, claimed that her husband simply added it to his collection. And when he came to the servants, he was convinced of just this. The girl didn't understand what he was getting at. Tristan continued the thought, playing with a strand of her hair, that her husband had until recently hidden his face from her. And he asked if she thought it was strange. A few minutes ago, Duke Vlad was walking down the corridor with a box in his hands. The knight bowed to him when he met. "I welcome the gentleman back." The man asked where Lily was. Talon replied that the lady inside was talking with her friend. Vlad was surprised. He opened the door and stepped onto the threshold. Through the open door, he saw a man bending over his wife. The box fell from his hands, and the Duke's gaze did not promise anything good. He saw the other one whispering something in Lily's ear. Tristan told the girl that her husband simply took her into his collection, because she is a cursed woman who brings only death to her husbands, and that all those who live in this castle were also abandoned by this world, like herself. What if the Duke truly considered her a worthy wife? Then he would never in his life allow these disabled people to serve her. Therefore, he considered it just another item in his collection, just another messed up person. The girl became sad, realizing the rationality of his words. She put Tristan some distance away from her, and she said that she herself knows. This surprised the man very much. The girl continued that perhaps he was right, that she was really cursed. Still, she thought she was living a good enough life for who she really was. She clutched the hem of her dress. She answered forcefully that she appreciated his concern, but she asked Tristan not to remind her again that he looked at her that way. The man knelt in front of Lily. He asked her to understand that this was not what he wanted to convey to her, that it is not he who needs to be blamed, but the person in whose veins the blood of the monster flows. Vlad came closer, but no one noticed him yet. The girl replied that it did not matter to her whether her husband was a demon, an animal, or a monster, But from her point of view, he was better than him, Tristan. She asked Tristan to apologize to the Duke. The girl saw her husband waiting not far away, but her interlocutor did not take this into account. He claimed that she seemed to enjoy feeling like a duchess. He grinned in her face and he asked, holding her shoulder, how long her happiness would last. He asked mockingly, "Does she really think that the Duke will not get tired of her and will not find another woman to entertain his perverted soul?" Vlad silently approached them from behind. Tristan reminded that she had already been married 3 times, but he was the one who calmed her down every time. He asked if her husband knew about this. He reminded her how afraid she was to marry the Duke. Tristan turned around, only now noticing the presence of a third person. But he didn't show it. Lily was confused. There were tears in her eyes. But Vlad grabbed Tristan's hand, which was so inappropriately lying on his wife's shoulder. The Duke's eyes glowed with an evil red light. He argued that for a sane person it does not matter who is in front of him. A duchess, a commoner, a family member, or just a friend. He believed that in any case it was unacceptable to force anyone in this way. Tristan fell to his knees in front of Lily. From under his forehead he looked warily at the Duke, and he asked if he was afraid of the monster's presence, sparkling with its red lights. Then Talon approached, accompanied by 2 knights. The Duke ordered the man to be taken to the dungeon. He obeyed the master's order. The man was lifted by the arm of a knight. Duke Vlad accused Tristan of attacking the leading lady of the house, and also in forcing servants into prostitution. Lily began to shout at Tristan so that he would confirm to her face that her husband was telling the truth. Tristan was led away by the arms of 2 of his lordship's knights. He appealed to Lily so that she would not be stupid and not trust the false words of her husband. The girl looked after the man with tears in her eyes, and the Duke was furious and his eyes sparkled with red lights. Lily told her husband that she was extremely sorry. She admitted that she had suspicions about Tristan earlier, but I couldn't even think that he would come to this. Vlad was not angry with his wife. He thought she should take a good rest today, and he advised us to take Buttercup for company. He hugged Lily tenderly, holding her head from his chest. He said that they would discuss everything with her later when she calmed down a little. The girl asked how she felt and if she was okay after the events. She looked into his eyes with concern, but he assured her that he was fine. Holding her by the neck and looking into her eyes, he said that he seemed to understand why she defended him to her friend. He told his Lily that she played the role of his wife perfectly, so don't worry about him. He pulled away from her embrace, saying goodbye. The Duke claimed that it was still cool today. He advised her to rest and stay warm. He quickly walked out of the room. Lady Lily was already surrounded by maids. She called out her departing husband by name, but he left the room without looking back at her call. The girl was left alone with her mental anxieties. The knight stood under the front doors. Talon mentally addressed his lordship, and he believed that rather than increase the number of guards, it would be worth reconciling with Milady. Lucia asked Sir Talon what they should do in this case. She was carrying a tray of tea and salad to her mistress. The girl voiced her fear that at this rate the mistress was not far from fainting. The knight asked my lady permission to enter, introducing himself. The girl was still in bed, she had not gotten up yet. Talon asked if she would like to walk along the corridor with him, and the bright but cold winter sun was shining through the window. Lady Lily walked along the red carpet of the castle, accompanied by a knight. She sighed a little. Talon asked her what was bothering her so much, but she only sighed again in response. Lily decided to be frank with the knight. She said with a sad face that her worries concerned Vlad, that she just doesn't know what to do with him. After all, her husband has been avoiding her for several days and nights, and this at a time when she no longer needs to close her eyes in his presence, and he doesn't try to hide his face. He simply leaves without explanation from the room where she appears, doesn't respond to her call, ignoring it as best he can. And it seemed to her now that he had built a wall between them. Talon replied that he was not able to comment or advise anything to the lady, since the Duke remained a mystery even to them. But he knew one thing for sure. Lily perked her ears, ready to catch his every word. The Duke disregards the conventions imposed by society, but it was in a good sense of the word. The knight told the girl that in Arcadia, people who induce girls into prostitution are executed, and usually the Duke himself personally cuts off the head and then hangs it on the wall. But her friend, for the first time, will simply be put in prison under guard. Lily believed that Tristan did not want to involve the maids in this, and she was sure that her father sent him as a replacement nanny. She turned to the knight, so that he would help her and take her to Vlad now. The Duke at this time was sitting behind business papers with a peacock pen and working. He answered the girl briefly, "No way." The girl did not back down. She persuaded him that she was not asking him to forgive him. She assured that Tristan occupied an important position in the Merchants' Guild, and they can use this by demanding a hefty ransom. Vlad began to quickly write something on paper. He said that first he would like to receive a ransom in the form of jewelry. Lily asked, not understanding why she needed to take this into account. Vlad accused his wife that she did not have the courage to say that she wanted to save him, that she called Tristan in a feverish delirium when she was sick. What did he tell her then, that she got married 3 times and he reassured her every time? Vlad concluded from all this that apparently they were connected by a long history. He grabbed his head, and he admitted that in a fit of jealousy he resorted to dirty tricks, thus becoming no better than that person. Lily was offended that apparently her visit was pointless. Vlad was simply horrified. She continued, apologizing for interrupting him while he was working, and she pointedly turned around and walked away from the Duke's office. The girl was deep in thought. She expected her husband to react differently, but he asked Lily to wait and not leave. He got up from the table in the hope of catching up with her as she left. Having caught up with her, he confessed that he felt like he was becoming a fool, and it was all because of her. The paper with the pen remained lying on the table. There were inscriptions crossed out and written again. The man hugged his wife from behind. He spoke into her ear that he does not consider what is happening to him as something bad. However, the man she calls her friend. He asked not to call him in such a sweet tone. After all, she is his wife after all, and I couldn't immediately start calling him by name. But the girl assured Vlad that this was due to the fact that she still does not quite know who he is. She looked into his eyes, and she claimed that she would like to know more about him.